Okay, hi French Tech Indonesia. Welcome to this new episode of Lunch and Learn. My name is Reza Pir, co-president of La French Tech Indonesia Jakarta chapter, and I will be your host today. To start, let me introduce a bit about La French Tech. La French Tech is a non-profit organization that gathers 63 communities in 50 countries around the world. In Indonesia, we are 100 plus like-minded entrepreneur, investor, and talents. Our mission is to build an inclusive community to foster the French entrepreneurial footprint in the region and the Indonesian tech ecosystem. We envision La French Tech Indonesia to be the go-to hub for entrepreneur, investors, and other tech startups actors in Indonesia. We organize on a regular basis these lunch and learn, networking meetups, pitch and plays, and one annual summit that this year will be in October. If you are not already a member, just go to frenchtech.id and join our network. We will add the links in the comment section. This being said, let's get to what brings us here today. Lunch and Learn episode 2, season 2, episode 3 by La French Tech Indonesia, a founder guide to the key terms, speaker Gagan Singh. Gagan is the CEO of Wows Global, which he founded. He started his career in corporate finance with Vedanta Resources, a UK-based conglomerate, before moving to Southeast Asia to work for Polyplex. Later on, he became a partner and CFO at Inspire Ventures, where he invested in startups such as aCommerce, Deliveree, Super Awesome, Totally Awesome, and Softbaked. In 2014, Gagan joined the founding team of Deliveree, a B2B logistic firm in Southeast Asia, where he served as group CFO and board member. He successfully raised over 120 million plus USD for the company before resigning to build his next venture. In this session is designed to provide valuable insight and practical tips on the important terms and clauses in term sheets, helping founders to negotiate better deals and navigate the fundraising process with confidence. Gagan, I hope I didn't forget anything. Thank you so much again for sharing your precious knowledge with our audience, and thank you for the audience to be here. Gagan, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Reza. I appreciate your kind words. Hello, everyone. It is my absolute pleasure to be here at La French Tech Indonesia. It's my first time here, and I sincerely hope that it turns out to be efficient and a valuable use of your time. So as Reza very nicely put in, my background. So my name is Gagan Singh. I am founder and CEO of this company on Wows Global. And today I would be presenting a session on term sheets, where we'll be decoding the complex terminologies in this fundraising domain. Now, since we have limited time today, approximately 20 minutes, I suppose, so what I've done is I've identified and shortlisted a select few items, which I personally feel are sometimes complex for founders to understand, but they play a very vital role in the life cycle of the company. So without further ado, let's get started. So allow me to share my screen here, and then I'll do you. So it'll just let me know if once all of you are able to see my screen.
All good.
Yes, all good.
Great. So yeah, so term sheets. Reaching to this stage is actually an exhilarating experience for any founder. So founders are spend countless hours in building their operations, getting them in order, and then they get accustomed to countless no's from their customers, from their suppliers, and even investors. But after hustling for months and months and tirelessly working day and night, they finally get a validation from an investor who agrees to invest in their firm. And what does this investor do? They issue you this term sheet. Now, what is this term sheet? Now, if I have to put it very simply, a term sheet is a non-binding agreement that lays out the financial terms of the proposed investment in the company. Now, all of you who are here on the call, I believe all of you are familiar that if somebody invests in your company, then there are like some really long form agreements like shareholders agreement, share subscription agreements, articles of association that needs to be prepared when the shareholding structure changes. But in order for those documents to be prepared, a condensed version needs to be agreed on between the investor and the investee. But that condensed version lays out the key terms which will eventually be reflected on those long form agreements. And those key terms are laid out in this term sheet, which are agreed between both the parties before the investment comes in the company. So that's what the term sheet is all about. Now, it's non-binding, and that's a very important element to be familiar with. What it means is that if for any reason, after issuing the term sheet, the investor backs out, there is no legal recourse in the hands of founders. Like, you cannot sue them because it's a non-binding agreement. Having said that, in this part of the world, investors take issuing term sheets very seriously. And in majority of the cases where the term sheets are issued by the investors to the investee are honored unless they discover something, fishy, or they discover something during the due diligence process, which was not clear to them prior. But more often than not, these term sheets are honored, even though it's a non-binding agreement. So just to summarize what I said, so term sheet, non-binding agreement, which means non-legal, and it's a summary of how the final agreements like a shareholder agreement and share subscription agreement would look like. But it's very important step, particularly during the early stage of the companies. Why? Because it sets the precedence. What I mean by that is, whatever terms you agree for at the time of your first financing round, and whether it's pro-investor or pro-investee, please expect most of those terms to be replicated in your future rounds. So what I mean by that is, it's a very important negotiation element early on, because if you gave some onerous terms, few of them we'll be discussing later in this presentation early on, then most likely the future investors will ask for that. And if you keep giving on to similar terms to all the future investors, there will be very little left for you as a founder. So because it sets the precedence, the first term sheets, particularly in the seed stage of the company, becomes very important. So I highly recommend to focus on the clauses which we'll be presenting in the session. So let's move to the first clause. It's the simplest clause, but one of the reasonably important ones, the valuation. So once you get the term sheet, more often than not, the first thing which any founder sees is what valuation am I being offered. Now, what is this valuation? Now, there are different kinds of valuations, like the pre-money valuation, post-money valuation, and I will define both these terminologies for you shortly. So let's start with the pre-money valuation. What is this pre-money valuation? Pre-money valuation is the valuation of the company on the said date. Like today, before, I repeat, before the new investment is coming to the company, how much is the company valued today based on their past performance as well as based on their future projections? And that's what is called the pre-money valuation. Now, there are multiple ways to calculate these pre-money valuations. Some of the common methods, which are, as you can see on the screen, are discounted cash flows. So discounted cash flow means that you're calculating the present value of the future free cash flows of the company based on your projections. And based on that number, you calculate the valuation of the company. So that is one of the methods which is commonly used. The second is a trading multiple. Trading multiple is that you take a certain multiple of your GMV or your revenue, or in certain cases, your EBITDA, to calculate the valuation of the company. So for example, if in your industry for early stage, the valuation multiple is say 10x and your revenue is 1 million, so then your valuation of the company is calculated as 10 million, 1x into 10, 10x. And the third is a precedent transaction. And that means investors look at the similar companies in your space and what multiple did they get. And based on that, they use the similar benchmark to calculate the valuation of these of your company. So these three are commonly used valuations methods. But let me clarify to you once again. Through these methods, you always arrive at the pre-money valuation, not the post-money, the pre-money. What it means is that once the calculations are made through any of these methods, the valuation which comes is a pre-money valuation, that is valuation of the company before the investment is made. Now, second is post-money valuation. Post-money valuation is very simple. It's a pre-money valuation plus capital injected. So like pre-money plus the investments which came is equal to post-money valuation. So very simple concept, but slightly confusing. Why? Let's look at an example. So OpenAI, almost all of us on the call are familiar with this company, ChatGPT. It's an incredible product which these folks have built, apart from other cool products as well. So this is an example which I show. So the company's pre-money valuation after the last round was 20 billion, and Microsoft invested $9 billion in it. So the shareholding, sometimes the mistakes which founders do is they say, okay, my valuation is 20 billion. Somebody is investing 9 billion, so they will get 45% equity of the company. That is 9 divided by 20. But that's not correct, because the shareholding which the new investor gets is not, the denominator is not pre-money, but the denominator is post-money. So what happens is if somebody's Microsoft put in $9 billion of fresh capital into OpenAI, then the post-money valuation becomes 29 billion, 20 plus 9. And the shareholding which Microsoft got for this new investment was 9 divided by 29, not 9 divided by 20. So instead of 45%, the true shareholding of the new investor is 31%. So be very careful when you commit to this, to the investors, because sometimes we have seen founders, because of their lack of familiarity with this concept, go and during the commercial negotiations say, okay, put $1 million in my company, the valuation is $10 million, and I give you 10% of the company. By that, what you have agreed to is that your pre-money valuation is not 10 million, but 9 million. Because if you're giving 10% of the company, so 1 million, then denominator 9 pre plus 1 capital, 10, and then 10%. So automatically you have reduced a company's pre-money valuation. So be very careful when you commit to the valuation, because sometimes investors hold you for your conversations, especially with regards to the shareholding they will be getting. So let's move to the second clause, security types. So once the investments are made into the company, investors will want something in exchange, right? So they will invest into your company and they will get something in exchange. Now, what is that exchange? It's the securities in the company. Now, it can be multiple types of securities. It can be either ordinary shares, it can be either preferred shares, or it can be either form of convertible notes. Now, let's quickly go through these three different securities. So ordinary shares are also known as common stock. They are the most basic types of shares, and almost all the founders' equity is our common shares or ordinary shares. So these shares include voting rights, dividend rights, and very boilerplate standard governance rights with regards to the company. So very basic form of shares are called ordinary shares. The second is the preferred shares. As the name suggests, these are preferred. They have preferred rights attached to them with regards to certain matters. They have preferred dividend rights, and in certain cases, preferred voting rights. Why these shares are preferred shares and why they have special rights? Because more often than not, the investors invest in your company at a higher valuation than what you have invested in. So because they are coming in at a later date and at a much higher valuation, they want preferential treatment from you. And that's why these preferred shares are issued. Now, the third is a convertible note. It is a very common type of note when you don't want to get into the valuation discussions. And it is usually done at the time of bridge financings. What is bridge financing? It's when you're in the middle of two rounds. So convertible notes are a form of a debt instrument where you have a debt in the company, but at a future date and based on a certain conditions, these debt converts into equity at a certain pricing. So convertible note is essentially a deferred equity issuance. Let me put it this way. So these common types of shares, ordinary, preferred, these common types of instruments, ordinary, preferred, and convertible, are very common in this part of the world. And as I said, if the equity round, then the investor they accept preferred shares. But in certain cases, when there's a bridge round requirement that you're in the middle of 2 rounds, but the company needs capital, convertible note is another common type of security. And here's a very common example which we use, why these securities are important. Because these two folks, I'm pretty sure all of us on the call are familiar with the faces. So on the left, we have Mr. Steve Jobs, and on the right, we have Mr. Mark Zuckerberg. Now, if I'll ask all of you, who's your favorite founder, I wouldn't be surprised if over 80% of the people choose Steve Jobs over Mark Zuckerberg. But we all know that Steve Jobs actually got ousted from his company, not once, not twice, but actually on 3 occasions. While Mark Zuckerberg, who owns just 13% of Meta today, but he owns over 50% of voting rights. What it means is that he can decide on every matter in the company on his own, on his sole decision. So understand the importance of the securities issue. So clearly, in this case, Mark Zuckerberg has issued him Class B shares with special voting rights because he was in a position to do so. But what I'm trying to say with this and what this example shows is that be very careful, because we all know the stories where founders are ousted from the company. And the only reason why it happens is because you have issued securities to the investors, which can sometimes come and bite you if the terms are too onerous against you. So be very careful and understand completely what type of securities are you issuing to investors in exchange of equity. Now, third is liquidation preference. And here is where it gets pretty interesting. And I would request all of you to pay special attention to this clause. Now, what is liquidation preference? If I have to define it simply, it's the order of payout, like who gets paid when. And second is the amount of payout. Who gets paid when and what do they get paid? So going back to the preference shares, as I told you, that preference shares are issued because the investors invest at a higher valuation, so they get preference shares. But apart from preference shares, one order is that they also get paid first. So whenever a company goes into liquidation or there is a sale of company, there is a certain proceeds which the company get, right? So this liquidation preference clause determines who gets paid what. And there are different kinds of liquidation preference structures. The most common ones is a preference stack. So preference stack is essentially, it's the order of payout. Like the person who came last in the cap table. What it means is that the person who invested at the highest valuation gets paid first. The person who invested in the slightly lower valuation gets paid second. So that's how the payment is made. So the descending order. So that means the founders in this get paid last because they are with the company since beginning. So the later round you came, you get paid first. So preference stack is actually a waterfall scenario. So the later you come, because you came at a highest valuation, you get paid first, and then the second one, then the third one. So if the company has raised Series B round, and goes into liquidation, so Series B shareholders get paid first, then Series A, and then so on. So this is a preference stack. Second, a common type of liquidation preference structure is multiple. So it's like where the investors say that I want at least 3x of my investment at the time of sale. I don't care at what value your company sell, but I need 3x of my capital. So for example, if the company invested like $10 million and the company sold for $100 million, then they automatically sit at 3x multiple, $30 million before anyone else is paid. So this is another common form of liquidation preference structures which investors request. The third is non-participative. Now, here is where it gets slightly complex and the lingos get slightly complicated. So non-participative structure, there are two factors through which the payout is determined. The first is the stakeholders have the option to choose either receive an amount equal to the liquidation preference multiple. So if they said 2x multiple, so they can, at the time of the liquidation, they can take 2x multiple of their investment, or not and, but or convert their preference shares into ordinary shares, and then whatever value they get based on their shareholding, they take that. For example, if the investor say invested $1 million in the company at a 2x multiple, and the company is sold for $10 million. Now, because one investor invested $1 million, their shareholding is 10%. So they have an option to choose either multiple, that is 1 into 2, that is 2x, $2 million. That's one option. Or the second is convert your 1 million into ordinary shares, that is 10% shareholding, and then take 10% of 10 million, which is 1 million. No points for guessing that the investors will choose the multiple one because the payout is double. They're getting 2 million against 1 million, so they choose 2 million. Now, on the other hand, if the company is, say, sold for $40 million and they still own 10%, then in that case, the multiple will be 2 million. But because they convert the shares, 10% shares into ordinary shares, then they get 10% of 40 million, which is 4 million. In that case, they will choose the second option, that convert their preference shares into common stock. So more often, almost in all the cases, the investor will calculate which scenario works best for them. They will choose it. So non-participative. And the fourth, last but not the least, is participative. Very small word, but extremely dangerous and onerous. It is similar to participative, except for the fact that the or becomes and. What I mean by that is, first, the investor will get a certain multiple. Plus, after they get that proceeds, whatever the balance is left, they will take the percentage into the ordinary shares holding and then take the money from there as well. So they get double dip rights. So first you pay me the multiple and then convert my shares into that percentage and then pay me equivalent percentage from the balance. So very small word, participative liquidation preference. But if you see this word in your term sheet, start running and don't look back. I'm telling you, it's extremely onerous. As such a small word, most of the founders don't really understand the gravity, because think, you give this right at the time of seed round, participative liquidation preference, without not being aware of it. Then it does same, the Series A investor take the same right. So now they have double dip rights too. Now Series B investors came, now they have double dip rights too. So imagine, even if you sell your company for hundreds of millions of dollars, because the investors are taking double dip, even though you hold 20% of the company at the time of exit, you might not get even 2% of the value, because all these rights you have given to the investors. So be very careful of the liquidation preference structures, because when the D-Day comes, when you're getting some liquidity, you don't want to surprise yourself by discovering these kind of rights which you have given to the investors. And my next slide actually shows an example, different structures, how they impact the payout. So in the first case, multiple, 2x multiple, the investors payout is 40 million. Non-participative option, if they choose option 1, they get 10 million, option 2, 20 million, and then 1x participative, 28 million. So as you can see, by each of these different liquidation preference method, how the founder's equities values is changing drastically. And that's why it's very important to be aware of this. Needless to mention, higher multiple like 2x and above should not be agreed, and participative rights should definitely not be agreed. Always try and negotiate on the non-participative rights with 1x multiple only. And that's, I assume, is the only fair option available for the founders. Other than that, it's onerous towards them. Now let's move to the next clause, anti-dilution. Now this clause has become increasingly important in today's fundraising climate. As we all know that companies are struggling more than ever to fundraise, and the investors are scrutinizing valuations more than ever before. And every now and then we come across a news that the company is raising at a lower valuation than the previous round. And what does that lead to? That triggers the anti-dilution clause. Now, what is this anti-dilution clause? The anti-dilution clause protects the investor in case there is a drop in the company's valuation. And there are two types of anti-dilution provisions. The one is the full ratchet. Now, what is this full ratchet? So for example, I, as an investor, invested in your company, and the share price at the time of my investment was, say, $100. Now, you raise another round 2 years later, but because of the global climate, you are raising at a lower round, and now your share price is $50. Now, in that case, because the share price has dropped, the company will issue to the original investor who invested at $100 free shares to compensate for the difference. So that is full ratchet. The second is a weighted average ratchet. Now, for weighted average ratchet, there's a formula through which a revised share price is calculated. It means that the number of shares that are issued versus the number of shares that should have been issued. And based on that, the weighted average price is calculated, and then the equivalent number of shares are issued based on the weighted average price. So no points for guessing. The weighted average ratchet clause is better for the founders because the dilution impact is lower on the founders. But if you get full ratchet, the dilution impact is much higher on the founders, as it is proved by my example. In this case, the company's valuation dropped from 100 million to 50 million. So see how founders shareholding in full ratchet dropped from 36.5 to 32.79%, while in weighted average ratchet clause, it just dropped by 0.4% to 36%. So you have to be very careful because down rounds are very common. And here are a couple of examples, like Stripe. Everybody knows about this company, one of the biggest payment gateways, payment providers. And then their valuation dropped from 95 billion to 50 billion in no time, in less than 18 months. So clearly, and same happened with Pomelo as well. It's a online to offline marketplace for luxury goods. So what I'm trying to say is down rounds are common. So brace yourself. Now, I don't know what terms did Stripe and Pomelo founders have agreed to, but if they have given full ratchet rights, imagine the dilution impact on them would be massive. But on the other hand, if they have given weighted average rights, then at least they still felt the pain of down round, but nowhere close to as much as full ratchet. So no points for guessing. As a founder, you should always put for weighted average anti-dilution rights rather than the full ratchet. Now, the next term is the pre-emption rights. Now, the pre-emption rights is the right to buy the shares to protect the shareholding. So it is more for the investors. So investors usually request this right to protect themselves from further dilution. So for example, I'm an investor in the company. I really like your company. And after first investment, I hold 10% of the shares in your company. Now you go in the market and you want to raise more money. So in that case, I would have the right to buy equivalent number of shares to keep my shareholding as 10%. That's what it. And the reason why I want it, because I don't want to dilute myself substantially because I believe in the company and I want to be a part of its growth story. So it's the right of first refusal, where before selling it to anyone, you come and sell it to me, and I have the right to buy it to a degree to protect my original shareholdings. And that's what is proven by this example. The number of shares held by the investors were 100, total number of shares were 1,000, shareholding was 10%. The company is issuing 500 more shares, and as an investor, I have a right to buy another 50 shares to protect my shareholding to keep the original of 10%. So very common rights, preemption rights. Then there's a tag along and drag along rights. So tag along rights are essentially for the minority shareholders, while drag along rights are for majority shareholders. Now, what does tag along rights? Tag along rights mean right to sell the shares. That means if any major shareholder of the company is selling, say, above 5% of the shares to anyone, then the other shareholders have a right to sell their shares at the same terms at which the major shareholder is selling. And the buyer who's buying the major shareholder's shares will be obligated to buy the other minority shareholders as well. So it's my right to sell my shares at the same terms at which the majority shareholders are selling. And this is what tag along rights is, and it's an optional right. So I may choose to sell, I may not choose to sell as a minority shareholders, but it's my protection as a minority shareholder. While drag along, on the other hand, is for the majority shareholders. As the name suggests, they can drag the minority shareholders in case they are selling they're selling the company and I own 60% of the company, then I have a right to drag the another 40% shareholders at the same terms so that we can accomplish the exit. So this is a mandatory clause, which means if I, as a majority shareholder, want to drag you, I can drag you, while tag along is an option. So tag along is a minority shareholder protection, while drag along is a majority shareholder protection, because you don't want majority shareholder to not being able to sell his company because 1% of the shareholders don't want to sell it. So it's for their protection. But the only caveat there is that the terms of selling should be same. So majority shareholders cannot have a sweetheart terms for themselves and then bad terms for the other shareholders. The terms should be absolutely same. Then there's redemption rights. Redemption rights, I'll go through it quickly. It's a required right to sell the shares to the company. As the preemption rights were right to buy the shares to protect the shareholding, redemption rights is right to sell the shares back to the company at a certain price. So again, as a founder, you don't want that kind of obligation. So always avoid giving redemption rights to investors because nobody knows how the future of the company will unfold. Then it's a board matters. It's a very simple. Every major investor in the company would want to have a board seat, and board decides on many matters. And I have laid out some of the common reserve matters like change in the shareholder agreement, winding up of the company, appointment of key people, distribution of dividends, etc. So board makes decision on these matters, and usually once a majority of the board approves, the matter is passed and approved, and the company can go ahead with those matters. So very important, but you should be very careful on setting the common reserve matters, because if you involve board in too many operational decisions, that essentially slows the company's progress. So be careful what matters you want board to decide and what matters you still want to keep it in the hands of management team. And then there are founders restrictions, like investors invest in you as a founder more than the company, because they believe that the companies will always pivot, but it's the founder who will make or break the company. So usually when the investors invest, they want you to block you for 30 minutes, like 3 years, and 3 years from the date of investment, so that you have to stay with the company and keep building. And if you're not doing that, then you lose your shares. And then there's some non-compete indemnification standard clauses. And then there are some other common matters like no shop clause. Like sometimes when the investors issue term sheets, they don't want you to go around and sell shop for other investors. They want you to keep it confidential while they are doing the diligence process. The second is an ESOP pool reserve. ESOP are employee stock option plan. The investors expect you to set it aside. Then there are representation of warranties that whatever you are telling to the investors are true and fair. And then it's a legal cost and closing date. Like you want to put a deadline on when the investment should be closed, and you do not want to keep it open-ended. So conclusion, prepare yourself for a negotiation, but be careful with these clauses. Common ones I've laid that: participative liquidation plans. Whenever you see it, never agree to it. Full ratchet anti-dilution rights, extreme pre-emption rights, redemption rights with higher multiples, and too many reserve matter for both. With that, I would like to end this presentation. And just to reiterate what our company does, we are experts in this field. We help companies raise their primary financing and also help facilitate secondary transactions. We also have an advisory arm. So if any of you need any assistance with regard to your fundraising or term sheets review or legal documentation, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you very much. You all have been a great audience.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was really, really good. So we have maybe time for 1 or 2 questions if there is any. If anybody has any question? I think it's so clear that maybe there is no question.
So what we can do, Reza, is that I'll send this deck to you, and you can share it with all the participants. Feel free to use it, and my email is there in that presentation as well. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot them to us, and we're happy to address. And this material always comes in handy. So I'm pretty sure whenever you get into discussions, you'll keep coming back to this document. That's the feedback which we have gotten from other audiences as well. So yeah, I highly recommend you use it.
Yeah. I also highly recommend to use it. There's no questions? No?
A quick question regarding the different liquidation preferences deals, and if there is any available data regarding the percentage of each type of deal currently, either globally, either in Southeast Asia. Everyone sees that the situation is getting more difficult to raise. So is it a tool that investors are using to draw the kind of deal to like a worse for the founders type of deals, etc.? Is it moving right now? Do you see that? Is there any data?
Great question, David. I don't have a data per se, but because we are in the market and we see transactions happening every other day, even now, yes, the terms have definitely gotten onerous for sure. Now, some founders play around with the liquidation preference right, but we have seen participative liquidation preference getting more and more common. But more than that, what is getting the most common is the full ratchet anti-dilution clause. That's what I'm seeing in every second term sheet, which was previously not the case. The reason is because investors are most worried about the valuation. Now, these days, valuations are so volatile that doing a down round has kind of become like people expect it to happen now, but a few years ago it was not the case, so investors don't want to be diluted substantially because of that. And weighted average, as we all know, is very pro founder, not pro investor. So they want, and investor want to protect themselves. So the full ratchet anti-dilution is the most common which we are seeing. But apart from that, there are other onerous terms like redemption rights and participative liquidation preference, which some investors sneak in. Now, very important, as a company, sometimes you don't have any other option and you take up these terms as well, because you have to survive the company. The whole purpose of this session is to make you aware of what repercussions these terms have. But at the end of the day, the best decision lies on the hands of founder, assessing the situation. Like if you don't take these terms, but you have no access to any kind of capital, then your company is shutting down anyways, unfortunately. So you got to do what you got to do. But the essence is try to negotiate, but negotiation, when you're on the table, you'll only be on the position of negotiation when you have more than one options. If there's just one option left, unfortunately, you have to take it or leave it. So that's a long way of me answering. So most common terms, I don't have a data, but full ratchet anti-dilution clause is getting very, very common in this part of the world. While some of the other investors, if the company is really weak, are also sneaking in the participative liquidation preference and higher redemption multiple. That means they're asking for a guaranteed returns from the company.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? You're done. Anyways, this session has been recorded and will be soon on our YouTube channel. So you can review it and review it and review it and replay it as much as you want. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Gagan, for doing this. It was really a pleasure again to see you and to listen to all your knowledge. And thank you to the audience to joining today at lunchtime. So I wish you all a great day. And if you don't already follow us, you can go to frenchtech.id and follow us on our WhatsApp group, LinkedIn, or any other social media. Gagan, again, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.